The princess asked the question the way you'd ask about a terminal diagnosis, carefully, as if the answer might be contagious. Dr. Yara Osei had been 3 bites into a reconstituted grain bowl when the summons arrived. The Vrethian courier, tall, pale as old bone, moving with the deliberate economy of a species that had decided long ago that unnecessary motion was a kind of waste, handed her a data chip and stood there until she took it. The message was 4 words: audience. Now, biological clarification. Osei put down the grain bowl. She'd learned in 6 weeks aboard the Vrethian diplomatic vessel Serevahl's patience that now, in their language, did not mean what it meant in hers. It meant, before the next breath cycle, which was approximately 8 minutes, which was absolutely now. The audience chamber smelled like cold stone and something faintly electrical. The Vreth didn't use soft lighting. They used precise lighting, narrow columns of white that illuminated exactly what they intended to illuminate and left everything else in shadow. Princess Serevahl stood in one such column, 7 feet of silver-gray exoskeleton and compound eyes that caught the light like a shattered mirror. She was holding a data slate. She held it the way you'd hold evidence. Dr. Osei, her translator implant rendered the princess's voice as something between a cello and a pressure gauge. I require clarification on a biological matter. I believe there is an error in your species documentation. Osei clasped her hands behind her back in what she'd learned passed for respectful attention among the Vreth. I'll do my best, Highness. Serevahl turned the slate. On it, a standard human biological profile. Reproductive section highlighted in the Vrethian equivalent of red, which was a deep amber that pulsed slowly, the color they used for anomalous data. Your documentation states that a human female may produce offspring. She paused, and Osei recognized the pause as the translator cycling through confirmation, checking its own work, as frequently as once per year, per individual, over a span of approximately 3 decades. That's correct. The compound eyes didn't change. The Vreth couldn't change their facial expressions in any way Osei had yet learned to read, but something shifted in the chamber, a quality of stillness that had not been there before. That cannot be correct, Serevahl said, not argumentatively, the way you'd say the math doesn't resolve. It is, though. Biologically speaking, the interval between viable pregnancies can be as short as 12 months. Most humans space them further apart for practical reasons, but the capacity is there. Serevahl set the slate down on the nearest surface with a precision that suggested she needed both hands free for whatever came next. You are saying, she said, that a single human individual could produce 30 offspring in a lifetime. Theoretically, it's not common, but it's happened. There are recorded cases of women having 20 or more children. The translator light on Serevahl's collar, a small amber disc that pulsed when processing complex speech, went dark. It stayed dark for 3 seconds. This had never happened before. 20, Serevahl said when the light returned. 20, sometimes more. Another pause, shorter. I will require a full biological audit, the princess said. Her voice had not changed. Her posture had not changed. Nothing about her had visibly changed except that she was now holding the data slate again, and her grip had compressed it approximately 2 millimeters at the edges, which Osei suspected was not intentional. Tomorrow, 6th hour, please be available. Of course, Highness. Osei was dismissed. She walked back to the mess, sat down, and looked at her cold grain bowl for a long moment. She ate it anyway. She had a feeling it was going to be a long deployment. The audit took 6 hours. By hour 2, Serevahl had stopped taking notes and started asking questions that had no scientific framing at all. It had begun properly enough. Serevahl's court scientists, 3 of them, each more carefully expressionless than the last, ran scans. They reviewed Osei's own biological data against the species documentation. They cross-referenced. They recalibrated. They found no error. Osei stood in the center of the scanning array and answered their questions in the technical vocabulary they preferred: gestational duration, interbirth intervals, ovulation cycles, metabolic costs of pregnancy by trimester. Then Serevahl had asked about twins. "It's a natural occurrence," Osei said. "One pregnancy, two offspring. Identical or fraternal. It happens in roughly 1 in 80 pregnancies without medical assistance. With certain fertility treatments, the rate increases significantly." Serevahl dismissed 2 of her scientists. "And the gestation period," she said. 9 months, this is confirmed. Standard range is 38 to 42 weeks, yes. Not as she checked something on her slate, not decades. No, months. Serevahl's translator light pulsed twice. "Among the Vreth," she said, and her voice had shifted into something that Osei's ear registered as different, more careful. Each word placed like a foot on uncertain ground. "Gestation requires 11 years. The biological cost to the parent is significant. Many do not attempt it twice." Osei had known this. It was in the briefing materials. Reading it in a document and hearing it stated plainly by the individual whose species it described were different things. "I'm sorry," she said. "That sounds very difficult." "It is not a matter of difficulty. It is a matter of—" Serevahl paused. "There is no word in your language, significance. Wait. Each offspring is the culmination of decades of biological preparation and years of physical cost. Each birth is another pause, an event, a state occasion, as you would say, recorded, commemorated." "I understand." "I do not believe you do. Not unkindly. The way you'd say, 'I don't think you've been to that planet,' a statement of fact, not an accusation. Because you're people, you deliver offspring in hospitals. Usually. Sometimes in vehicles." Osei's mouth twitched. She controlled it. "It happens." The remaining court scientist made a small sound that the translator didn't render. Serevahl glanced at him, and he went very still. "A human can carry a child to term," Serevahl said, turning back. "Deliver that child in the back of a ground transport and resume normal activity within weeks. Within days in some cases, though that's not recommended." The translator light went dark again. Shorter this time, just a second, maybe 2. "Do you have children, Dr. Osei?" The shift in register was sharp enough that Osei felt it. They had moved from clinical data to something else. She wasn't sure what to call the something else. "No," she said. Serevahl's compound eyes caught the light. "Why not?" It was the most disarmingly direct question Os had been asked in 6 weeks of extraordinary conversations. She opened her mouth and found, for a moment, that the answer she usually gave, timing, career, circumstances, felt oddly thin in this context. Like explaining why you hadn't used a lifeboat. "It hasn't been the right time," she said. Serevahl was quiet for a moment. Then she said to her remaining scientist, "Leave us." He left. The door sealed with the soft pneumatic compression that meant privacy mode. Serevahl stood in the column of white light and looked at Osei with the expression Os had slowly learned meant something close to unguarded: the slight lowering of the forward limbs, the particular stillness of the antennae. "Dr. Osei," Serevahl said, "do your people understand what they are?" It was the most honest question anyone had ever asked Osei about being human, and she didn't have a good answer. She took a moment. In the Vrethian diplomatic tradition, taking a moment before answering was a sign of respect. It meant the question was worth thinking about. She'd found this useful in the past 6 weeks. "Tell me what you mean," she said. Serevahl moved to the long viewport that ran the length of the chamber's outer wall. The star field beyond it was dense. They were in the inner arm, where stars crowded close enough that some nights the void looked more white than black. She stood there with her back to Osei, which among the Vreth was not rudeness but intimacy. You showed your back to someone you trusted not to strike it. "Bring your data," Serevahl said. "The historical record, whatever you have access to." Osei pulled up her research tablet. She had extensive files. She was a xenobiologist whose secondary specialty was human comparative demographics, which made her uniquely suited for exactly this kind of conversation, which was probably why she'd been posted here. She started with the Black Death. 14th century, Earth calendar, she said, projecting the data onto the chamber wall with a gesture Serevahl had granted her in the first week. A bacterial pandemic. Estimates vary, but between 30 and 60% of Europe's population died within 7 years. In some regions, the mortality rate exceeded 75%. Serevahl turned from the viewport. She looked at the numbers. The recovery timeline, she said. 2 generations, roughly 60 years. The translator light pulsed slowly. You lost half your population and replaced it in 60 years. Closer to 70 in some regions, but yes. Among the Vreth, Serevahl stopped. She moved to the data display and stood close to it, the compound eyes processing the mortality curves, the recovery graphs, the steep lines of repopulation that followed every drop. If the Vreth lost half our population, the species would require, she calculated. Osei could see her doing it, the small movements that indicated active computation. 600 years, minimum, and that assumes perfect conditions. We don't require perfect conditions, Osei said. She pulled up more data. The wars of the 20th century, the flu pandemic of 1918, each one a downward spike in the population graph followed by something that, on the scale of geological time, looked almost like indifference, the line dropping, and then rising, always rising, with a steepness that Osei had grown up taking for granted and only now, standing beside a member of a species for whom replacement was measured in centuries, understood as something else. We lost approximately 17 million people in the First World War, she said. 50 to 100 million in the influenza pandemic that followed it immediately, 70 to 85 million in the Second World War, which began 21 years later. She let the numbers land. World population in 1940 was approximately 2.3 billion. By 2000, it was 6 billion. Serevahl said nothing. The translator light was steady. The math of it, Osei said, is that we are biological machinery designed to survive catastrophe, not to avoid it, to absorb it. Every significant population collapse in our history has been followed by a recovery surge. It's not cultural. It's not a choice. It's cellular. Our biology treats extinction as a problem to be solved. She pulled up one more graph, the long one. Homo sapiens population from 50,000 years ago to the present, a line that flatlined for most of its length, and then, in the last 12,000 years, bent upward at an angle that looked, frankly, aggressive. Serevahl looked at it for a long time. My advisors, she said, told me that humanity should never be made into enemies. She paused. I was given the political reasoning, the military capability, the economic factors. Another pause. They did not show me this. Would it have changed anything? It would have changed what I was afraid of. She turned from the data. I was afraid of your weapons, Dr. Osei, your adaptability, your creativity in conflict. A long moment. I was not afraid of the right thing. Osei looked at the graph on the wall, the long flat line, the sudden, almost violent upward sweep of the last 10,000 years, the number at the far right end. What happens? Serevahl said, and her voice had the quality of someone asking a question they had already, somewhere in the last hour, answered for themselves, to a species that cannot be reduced. Osei didn't answer. The silence in the chamber was the kind that meant the question had done its work. Serevahl turned back to the viewport and the crowded stars. She was quiet for a long time. Then she reached forward to the diplomatic navigation display she'd been granted authority over since the start of the mission, and opened the star charts, the formal diplomatic record, the one that would be filed with the Vrethian Council and transmitted to the Galactic Registry and stored in archives that outlasted governments. She found Earth's entry, A blue point in a system the Vreth had labeled Point of Contact 7, a clinical designation, the language of arrivals, of things that were encountered and catalogued and filed. Osei watched her select it. Serevahl paused with her stylus over the label field for 3 seconds. Then she deleted the designation and entered 2 words in Vrethian script that the translator rendered after a moment as point of origin. She did not draw a border around it. She left it open on all sides, the way you'd leave a door open in a room you intended to return to, in a house you decided to stop pretending you owned.